To ask Dr. Patrick to introduce our guest this morning, and we're in for a treat.
Merci infiniment, Pierre, and now the moment that everybody has been waiting for. It's really not the financial statements, Manon. As many of you know, I had the distinct honor and privilege of accompanying His Excellency, the Governor-General of Canada, during his first state visits to Malaysia, Vietnam, and Singapore earlier this month. These visits focused on education, research, innovation, and trade. During his visits, His Excellency spoke about the diplomacy of knowledge, education, and globalization in the 21st century. Panel discussions at every city focused on how research builds smart cities and innovative communities. At the CFI, we believe that research builds communities. In fact, it's the tagline in our new brand message. We see example of this right across the country, where communities have developed around their local research enterprise and the role it plays in developing new and improved products, services, and technologies. These innovations bring jobs and prosperity, and in the end, they build rich, vibrant Canadian communities. Our speaker this morning knows firsthand the importance of research in building smart communities. Son Excellence, le très honorable David Johnston, a débuté sa carrière comme professeur à la faculté de droit de l'Université Queen's, puis à l'Université de Toronto. Il est devenu doyen de la faculté de droit de l'Université de Western Ontario en 1974. Il a été nommé principal et vice-chancelier de l'Université McGill en 1979, poste qu'il a occupé jusqu'en juillet 1994. De 1999 à 2010, il a été président à l'Université de Waterloo. His Excellency has served on many provincial and federal task forces and committees and numerous boards. He was the founding chair of the National Roundtable on the Environment and the Economy and chaired the federal government's Information Highway Advisory Council. He is the author or co-author of 24 books, holds honorary doctorates from over a dozen universities, and is a companion of the Order of Canada. J'invite maintenant Son Excellence le très honorable David Johnston à nous adresser la parole.
Ambassadors, members of Parliament, Kevin, Gilles, members of the Board of Directors, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to be here today. I so strongly believe in the power of collaboration, so it was with great alacrity that I accepted your invitation with a particular focus on collaborative innovation in a changing world. Allow me to begin by recalling that which has not changed, namely the creativity of Canadians and our commitment to building smarter, more caring communities. I'm so glad that Gilles referred to communities and building communities as a direct function of CFI. I remember when we were celebrating the 50th anniversary of the University of Waterloo about 3 years ago, we had a wonderful birthday party at lunch on January the 5th or 6th, whatever the day was, to celebrate the 50th. And we had a reception about 5 o'clock in the afternoon for all of the local elected representatives, city government, regional government, provincial government, and the federal government, to thank them and their predecessors for what they had done to build a thriving, innovative university in our community of Waterloo. And I had prepared some remarks the previous night, the theme of which, this university belongs to the community. Nobody owns the university, but this university belongs to the community. It's a manifestation of it. And just as I was going out the door, one of our press people said, "Have you read today's newspaper?" In the editorial, I said, "Not yet. I typically read it in the evening." They said, "Well, it's celebrating our 50th anniversary." And the headline reads, "This community belongs to the university," reversing my slogan. So I went to the reception and I handed out the headline from the newspaper, "This community belongs to the university," and I gave the title of my speech, which was, "This university belongs to the community." And I said, neither is wrong, both is right. There's a wonderful symbiotic relationship between these two. and it explains in very large measure the success that that community has had, Canada's Technology Triangle and the University of Waterloo. As Gilles has said, I've just returned from a state visit to Southeast Asia, where expat Canadians are having a positive impact on education, business, and culture, and where our ability to work collaboratively and to innovate is increasingly recognized and sought after all. Many, many takeaways from that. One is that Singapore next year will invest 3.5% of its gross domestic product in R&D, 3.5%, up from 3%. That'll put them a little more than twice what our record is. And so many interesting innovations that come from that. Canada is renowned for its wealth of minerals, timber, and fresh water. And to these resources, we can add our collective ingenuity and our talent for collaboration. But our great challenge is to recognize that we have two economies, one which is commodity-based, where we don't really add very much value and should, and another is manufacturing high-value goods and services, which is extraordinarily competitive. And somehow we must bring the second into the first and take our abundance of commodity and upgrade them constantly. The challenge for the foundation that set itself is an important one. Thanks to your work, researchers in labs across the country have been provided with the tools and equipment necessary to succeed. Research you're supporting is helping to build our communities and strengthen our country. I had a couple of examples here in my notes, and I was so struck by this very attractive brochure, which is at your table, which shows 5 of these remarkable specific stories of just what difference CFI has made. And if you look at the leverage that come out of those investments, it's very, very attractive. I'll speak about one of them having to do with aquaculture a little bit later in my remarks. Votre impact se manifeste également dans la lutte contre le cancer grâce à l'appui que cette fondation apporte aux recherches qui ont cours au laboratoire de nanorobotique de l'École polytechnique de Montréal. Les chercheurs qui y travaillent ont ouvert de nouveaux horizons en utilisant la nanotechnologie pour administrer des médicaments anticancéreux qui ne causent pas de dommages aux tissus sains. C'est une première mondiale et cela nous rappelle que la valeur de savoir dépend de sa capacité d'aider autrui et que si une innovation réussit, c'est parce qu'on a su porter une oreille attentive aux besoins des gens. I could go into a number of these stories, but I'll leave you to read these in the brochure so I can save a little time for questions at the answers. But what these stories in the brochure and ones that are familiar to all is the importance of the preconditions for innovation, the need to share resources, the importance of listening to and helping people, and the need to play to win in the international arena. And of course, as this foundation reminds us, we must invest in research and development wherever possible. But innovation is but much more than tools and equipment, as you know, and as Gilles has so thoughtfully underlined. It's about people working together. Success stories such as those in your brochure demonstrate the collaborative nature of knowledge building in the 21st century with researchers, universities, and organizations such as this, pooling talents and resources to great effect. Few discoveries today are made in isolation, particularly in research and innovation, and our greatest advances often occur at the intersections between disciplines, organizations, and communities. And ultimately, all knowledge is interrelated. Le terme écosystème de l'innovation est de plus en plus utilisé parce qu'il reflète la nature dynamique, synergétique de l'innovation, du fait que les idées, les connaissances et les ressources sont partagées et sous-tendent la pensée créative. Cela me rappelle un exemple d'écosystème de l'innovation que j'ai moi-même vécu. Certains parmi vous savent peut-être que j'ai déjà eu le privilège, comme je l'ai dit, d'agir comme principal de l'Université McGill pendant 15 ans, qui fera d'ailleurs merveilleuse. L'un des projets auxquels j'ai travaillé durant cette période a été l'établissement d'un programme de maîtrise professionnelle en génie, particulièrement aérogénie. Ce programme a été développé de concert avec 5 autres universités de la région et l'industrie aérospatiale locale pour trouver une solution à un problème spécifique, cela de manque de personnel qualifié au Canada et de nécessité pour les entreprises de recruter des talents de l'étranger. What was so interesting about that example is I got a call one morning from Raymond Roy, who was then heading Bombardier Aircraft, and he said, I want you to come for breakfast next Wednesday morning at 7 o'clock in my office because I want to give hell to one of your good friends. I said, Raymond, I'll be there. Who's the friend? He says, it's Roland Doré, the director of the École Polytechnique. I said, I'll be there. And he said, by the way, I want to do the same for you. I said, I'm not so sure I'll be there. So Roland and I arrived, and Raymond said, it's costing us $300,000 to import aeronautical engineers from Belgium, from France, from Northern Ireland, wherever we can find them. And after we got them here, for every 3, only 1 is left after a couple of years. One's gone on to the United States, another gone back home because the conditions weren't good. Why aren't you graduating these people for us? And we said, very simple answer. It's called Avro Aero. We used to have thriving aerospace programs at each of these 2 universities. They were canceled after the Avro Aero was canceled. Well, he said, I understand that. How many professors do you have now? We said, well, we have 2, perhaps 3, and you probably need 12 to 15 to make these programs work. Roland at École had 3. And thanks to Raymond's urging, we then canvassed Sherbrooke, Laval, and Concordia, and we came up with a critical mass of about 15. And from that came a shared 5-university, 7 or 8 industry, part-time professional master's program. The industries were Bombardier, CAE, Air Canada, Pratt & Whitney, Eru, that builds landing wheels, and Bell Helicopter, Textron. And to that, we added others. And the idea, of course, was they would employ graduate engineers. They would pay their salaries. They would undertake what began to be module portions of their course, stay writing on in their position. And we filled, through this collaborative effort, that very important need of aeronautical engineers in Montreal. It's not the only reason, but it's one of the reasons we have such a thriving aerospace industry in Canada today, in Montreal, with the 3rd largest production of aircraft in the world. La solution a été de cultiver ici même au Canada une main-d'œuvre capable d'occuper ces emplois. Une fois le but identifié, les collaborateurs ont travaillé étroitement entre eux pour élaborer le programme de maîtrise. Cette expérience démontre clairement qu'il est important de se parler et de déterminer les forces et les faiblesses de nos collectivités. Gilles and I mentioned earlier that we recently returned from Southeast Asia, Malaysia, Vietnam, Singapore. Having met with a cross-section of people in these countries, including expat Canadians, I can reaffirm that diversity is one of the great strengths of our society, perhaps not understood as well as it should be. Canada attracts more immigrants per capita than any other nation in the world. And secondly, thanks to our approach to multiculturalism, we encourage retention of cultural heritage. It's very appropriate to be a hyphenated Canadian. It's a matter of pride that when you come to this country, you don't give up your heritage. You plant it in new soil, and it grows in a Canadian way. Canadians speak many of the world's languages, and we're also home to a remarkable number of cultural diasporas. These 2 assets give us great global advantage, and I believe we should celebrate and build upon them in reaching out to the world. Remember Tom Brostowski saying one time he was in the subway in Toronto, and there was a, if you need help, phone this number, advertisement in the subway, and it said, we can provide help to you in 175 different languages. Toronto, there's more languages spoken than any other place in the world, and one does not have to abandon that cultural heritage. Among other things, that's a great trading advantage. It means Canadians can go anywhere in the world and trade and relate to those particular countries in the language of their own. And the second thing that comes from that is this wonderful creativity. I often say to know one is to know none. When you have 2 languages, you look at things from 2 different angles, and it's a wonderful stimulus to creativity, a great Canadian advantage we should use more and more. A diversity of ideas, experiences, and abilities can encourage creativity. I often draw on the history of Renaissance Florence, my favorite town in history, especially the 16th century, to illustrate how working together can stimulate new discoveries. The Renaissance was a period of unprecedented activity in the arts, science, politics, religion, and scholarship, and provides vivid illustrations of the scope and variety of creativity. Just think of that little town of 35,000 people on the banks of the Arno River with Michelangelo in sculpture and painting, Leonardo in painting and engineering, Machiavelli, who wrote the first popular bestseller, The Prince, in 1523, Savonarola in religion, the Medici family in banking, and provided much of the wealth for that. A tremendous cauldron of creativity in a relatively small country, looking at the past, drawing from the important lessons of civilization, and of course looking forward. Gilles and I were with Moshe Safdie in Singapore. It's just been an extraordinary constellation of buildings and an art science museum in Singapore, and he was showing amongst his own drawings of this building some of the drawings of Leonardo da Vinci, of his artistic creativity, and some of the early drawings of an airplane, something that took flight. That all happened there. An open mind is an essential ingredient of discovery and innovation. One of the most famous examples, of course, is the story of Galileo, who played a key role in transforming our knowledge of the cosmos when he observed the moons of Jupiter through his telescope. The implications were enormous. If moons revolve around Jupiter, it meant that they do not revolve around the Earth, and therefore that Earth is not at the center of the cosmos. The story and Galileo's ensuing struggle with the authorities of this day are now familiar to all of us, but perhaps well known, and a reminder of how the absence or suppression of differing viewpoints can stifle innovations are the lengths to which some people went to try to preserve the old worldview as the evidence piled up against it. For Galileo's discovery was built upon those already made by Copernicus and Kepler. Fearing and rejecting the findings, supporters of the status quo built elaborate models that attempted to explain the seemingly irregular motions of planetary bodies and to preserve Earth's place at the center of the universe. Ultimately, these attempts collapsed under the weight of fact, and suddenly a new constellation of possibilities arose, this time centered on the understanding that the planets, Earth included, in fact, orbit the sun. This story indicates a number of basic truths about discovery, the way that one finding builds on another, the role of advanced tools and equipment, Galileo's telescope, for example, and the vital importance of critical thinking, not just applied to discovery, but also in assessing our findings and informing and changing our assumptions when necessary, and creating in a society the conditions that are as fertile as possible for that kind of collaboration. I was in Atlantic Canada about a month ago. That remarkable Canadian, Kevin Lynch, brought together a group of people to stimulate innovation in Atlantic provinces, harking back to the days around Confederation when it was one of the most innovative places in the world. Kevin's idea is to have an annual conference 3 years running to stimulate and collect the ideas. And I was saying, you know, we're at a very interesting period in history. Perhaps one of the great hinge points in history was when we ceased to be just hunter-gatherers and began to be peasant farmers. We actually settled down on a piece of land and we began to farm it. We believe that occurred about 7,000 years ago in what is today southern Iraq, in the Gardens of Babylon, later became Gardens of Babylon, in the ancient city of Ur, which is the most continuously inhabited city in the world. And when that happened, when human beings settled down in permanent communities, cities began to rise, they became more prosperous, they became more healthy, the population expanded, etc. It was a very important change. Now, in the last 20 years, we have learned not simply to be hunter-gatherers of the sea, but peasant farmers of the sea. And you've got a beautiful example in your brochure here about the aquaculture facility, the marine science facility at Memorial University, which CFI supported so well. And one of the things they're doing is they're the only place in Canada to raise juvenile cod, to do aquaculture for cod. Think of Canadian history, the 3 F's, fish, fur, and the faith. Fish were so important, and 20 years ago the cod disappeared. Thankfully, it looks as if they're coming back, but we no longer will simply have to hunt the cod on the sea. We've learned to farm the cod in the sea, as we have with so many other things. One of my corny jokes has to do with salmon. My wife gets so fed up with me when I tell corny jokes, which is quite frequent, and I say, but I enjoy it so much. So let me tell you a corny joke that illustrates that to me. When I was a boy growing up in a very poor family, if we ever had salmon, it was rare because it was very expensive. Today, thanks to aquaculture, salmon is quite inexpensive and has become almost a commodity. So I say, whenever I have poached salmon, today it describes how it was cooked, as opposed to, in a previous lifetime, how it was caught. And just think of that. You know, what we've done with a delicacy like salmon, we've made it almost a commodity because we've learned to be farmers of the sea. One of the stories harking back to the Gardens of Babylon, one of the projects that excited me a lot at Waterloo was a project that had some CFI funding and had some IDRC funding, and it was to restore the Hanging Gardens of Babylon in southern Iraq. The marsh people there, about 1 million of them, had lived for centuries as people who farmed the marshes. They had learned to combine land and sea. They were Shiites and more sympathetic to Iran than Saddam Hussein wanted, and so he flooded the marshes and drove 1 million people out of existence. About 500,000 of them, we believe, were killed or destroyed in ways that their civilization disappeared. But 500,000 have now returned, and Waterloo, in its work on fresh water, is leading the project to restore the ancient gardens of Babylon, or to restore the Garden of Eden. We believe in the Old Testament, the Garden of Eden sat there. It's very exciting to see that kind of research being stimulated from Canada. And what's particularly interesting to me is it illustrates so well that notion of not simply farming the land, but also farming the sea, because one was doing it with marshland. The other story I'll leave with you about that is in St. John's about 6 months ago, I was at Provincial Aerospace, which is an interesting company that in fact had scheduled airlines in Newfoundland and Labrador and chartered airlines, but it has a very interesting aeronautics laboratory where it takes, in this case, Dash 8 airplanes, a $20 million investment by the UAE to produce an airplane with very intricate and elaborate sensor mechanisms and instruments to read the sea from above, partly to deal with piracy and other illegal activities such as drug smuggling, but also to read the sea so that we can mine it appropriately. This is a Canadian industry. How did it start? It started because it was found that the transmission lines, the cables from Europe to Canada, were attracting the Russian trawlers. Either it was the vegetation that was growing on those cables, or there was some kind of magnetic influence that actually caused schools of fish to gather above those transatlantic cables. And the trawlers, of course, from time to time did quite a bit of damage to them. They actually broke them, much damage. So Provincial Airlines was given a surveillance contract to fly over those cables and to identify when the Russian trawlers were close, and if there was a break, they could do cause and effect and claim the damages. But out of that very sophisticated airborne survey came a whole new industry, which is surveillance of the sea and the sensors and so on, and a remarkable Canadian contribution. So back to the story of Atlantic Canada. You know, here is a region of the world that understands the sea as hunter-gatherers. How do we develop that understanding into agrarian peasants to both farm and to mine the sea? And guess what country has the largest coastline in the world? Canada. A great opportunity to use this transition in history that we saw 7,000 years ago, but apply it not simply to land and the sea. Discovery drives innovation. As a society, we must reaffirm our openness to new ideas while building upon the best of our traditions, and we must embrace lifelong learning through broad education in science, technology, engineering, math, and the humanities, and especially in critical thinking. And I include them all. I was so interested in reading Steve Jobs' obituary, and he said, I'm told I'm a high techie. He says, I'm not a high techie. I'm a person who married the arts and humanities with technology. And in fact, Steve Jobs dropped out of Reed College in his first year, but retained one course. He studied calligraphy, design, and married the arts and humanities. By working together, collaborating to share ideas, resources, and needs, and always aspiring to excellence, we can lay the foundations for more and greater innovation. Your help is essential, and I thank each of you for your dedication to building a smarter, more caring nation. And I especially congratulate this wonderful Canadian Foundation for Innovation that sets the pattern in so many ways. Missy, thank you.